im se svima, i malima i velikima, i bogatima i siromašnima, i slobodnjacima i robovima, dade žig na njihovu desnu ruku ili na čela njihova, te da nitko ne može ništa kupiti ili prodati, osim onoga ko ima žig ili ime zvijeri ili broj imena njezina.
Pozdrav, dragi narode, dobrodošli u još jednu epizodu Slobodni. Danas se bavimo ponovo ozljedama od onog čarobnog lijeka kojeg su nam gurali 2020. 2021. 2022. kao spasenje od pandemije, a danas znamo sa sigurnošću da ne samo da nije bilo spasenje, ne samo da nije zaustavljalo niti sprečavalo širenje, bilo je i nesigurno i neefikasno. Međutim, o tome se u Hrvatskoj naravno još uvijek ne smije u službenim kanalima govoriti, a svima je jasno zašto. Zato što je važnije ono što skrivaju nego što ono što u službenim kanalima govore. Zato sam ja i potražio sugovornika na drugom kraju svijeta u Sjedinjenim Državama gdje je ipak sloboda govora na većoj razini, pa ćemo danas imati priliku vidjeti nekoga koji je i sam ozlijeđen od cjepiva mRNA protiv COVID-19, koji je član organizacije koja se bavi onima koji su stradali od toga, a ujedno je sudjelovao u 2 izvrsna dokumentarca koji ste imali prilike vidjeti na mom kanalu i pozivam vas da ih pogledate dalje. Ali da ne širim, krenemo danas. Moj današnji gost je doktor, orthopedic surgeon, Mr. Joel Wallskog. Hello, Joel. Welcome to our show in Croatia.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for your response. Can you say a few words about your background?
Yes, I'm 55 years old. I'm an orthopedic surgeon here in the United States. I was enjoying what I would say is a happy life in 2020 until I received my one Moderna injection on December 30th of 2020. And within about 1 week, I started having problems with numbness and weakness in my legs. And then I began falling. And within about a week after that, I was quickly diagnosed with a condition called transverse myelitis, or basically an injury to my spinal cord. And I received treatment early in 2021 for that condition of transverse myelitis. But unfortunately, because of that condition and then numerous other medical conditions I've since developed, all after my one Moderna shot, I've now unfortunately had to retire because of my medical disability.
That means that you're not anymore practicing medicine.
You're correct. I tried to return to work after a little break and tried to receive some treatment, including steroids and a medicine called IVIG or IV immune globulin. But unfortunately, because of my spinal cord injury and as well as I refer to other medical conditions that have developed since from the shot, I've never been able to return to work as a physician.
Do you have confirmation that this is adverse event from the shot?
Well, I've seen numerous physicians over the years, all who basically have confirmed. Again, I was totally healthy until 7 days after my shot. And the most likely cause of that, because it started 7 days after my shot, was the shot. So I have numerous physicians, numerous medical notes that confirm that relationship or that causality.
Yeah, because whatever happened here in Croatia, everybody says we don't know what is the reason, but for sure we know that vaccine is not the reason. I suppose you heard this kind of explanation also. I have to ask you something honestly. You received this vaccine very early. That means on 30th of December 2020. That was 20 days after first shots. How come that you trusted so much to this vaccine?
Well, that's a great question. And why did I choose to do that? The answer is I don't know. I can tell you a couple of reasons why I think I went ahead and did it. First of all, I was part of what in the United States was called the 1A group. So those were the earliest people that could get the shot. And again, I was a healthcare worker, so I was eligible in that 1A group to get the shot. Now, why did I do it? Well, the answer is, I guess I'll never know, but I can't change the past, correct? So one thing I'll tell you is I certainly trusted all of the federal health agencies we had here. I was part of the healthcare system that I believed in and I trusted in. In my entire career, we looked at organizations here like the FDA, like the CDC, like the NIH. They were our gold standard. They are who we always look to for guidance. And again, as a physician, I was part of that system. And I believed, and I admit relatively blindly, in what they told us. Now, I have since learned a heck of a lot, and I would certainly do things differently, but I can't change the past. So my goal is to move forward myself, but also to help, the thousands and frankly, as you know, the millions of people across the world that have been injured by the shots.
Yes, I understand you completely because I heard lots of these kind of stories. But from the start, for example, myself, I'm not a medicine worker. I'm an ordinary entrepreneur, but I saw from the start that they were lying about lots of things. We knew from the start that this virus is not that deadly as they told us. Also, we saw that there was some kind of treatment who helped. Also, we knew that these lockdowns didn't help. And after they lied so much, how come that we can trust them again with this mRNA? We now know it's gene therapy, not really vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, remember they always said, follow the science. And as you know, in retrospect, they were somewhat anti-science. We were putting alcohol gel in our hands, which has nothing to do with eradicating a respiratory virus. We were told to social distance. That was important for 6 feet, which really had no science behind it. We ignored natural immunity, ignored available products such as ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, et cetera. We intubated people early. We avoided steroids early on. We did so many things that I would describe in retrospect were anti-science. And that's the irony, is when we were all told to follow the science, in fact, we were being told anti-science.
That's true. And also, they said not only follow the science, you have to trust the science. And as I understand, science is not to be trusted because that's for religion. We need to doubt to science. That's how we found out what is really the truth, because truth is changing according to the development of science.
That is absolutely true. And, sometimes we make conclusions in science and we find new data. And when we find new data, we re-question our conclusions. And sometimes our conclusions change. But as you know now, there was ample evidence of concerns of the safety of these shots back in 2021 and certainly in 2022. It's clear and evident, as released in many communications between the FDA and the CDC here in the United States, that there was ample concern about myocarditis in young people back in 2021. And that was not communicated to the public as it should have been. So again, it did eventually get out, but again, there are communications that are now public emails that have been released through the leadership of the FDA and the CDC, showing their concern about myocarditis, but holding off and warning the nation and warning the world because they were worried how it might affect vaccine hesitancy. And again, as you know, without truth and transparency and data, we can't have informed consent.
That's true. Informed consent was the one very important thing, but we didn't have it. Well, you were a member of crew who recorded one documentary inside vaccine trials. And what was this documentary about?
Well, there's actually 2 documentaries that we did with Erkki Tangso, who is an awesome director and producer from Estonia. So he helped us create 2 different vaccines, and both of them are available for free at InsideMRNAVaccines.com. And then there's a separate one called InsideTheVaccineTrials.com. So I encourage your listeners and your viewers to watch those. So the two are really to try to show people the science, or sometimes the lack of science, behind the development, the production, and the distribution of the vaccines. So the Inside the Vaccine Trials documentary goes a little bit more into the corruption around how the vaccines how they went through the trial process. And as you all know, the Pfizer clinical trial, the phase 3 clinical trial, is approved in 108 days, when the typical vaccine approval takes 10 or more years. So the trial documentary really goes into the details about how normal regulatory norms were frankly ignored and sometimes censored. I can tell you the story about Maddie DeGarry, who was at that point, 12-year-old girl who was horribly injured in the phase 3 clinical trial for young adolescents. And if you look at how her case was taken care of, if you look at the phase 3 clinical trial data for adolescents 5 to 12 or 5 to 13, her story is reduced to basically that she has a stomach ache. Still to this day, Maddie Gary is in a wheelchair. She has a feeding tube. She can't walk. She's absolutely miserable. And her whole story, okay, was reduced to a stomach ache. And that's sometimes how these cases of these horrible vaccine injuries were censored or mislabeled so as to allow the clinical trial to proceed and emergency authorizations to be granted. Now, the other documentary just goes a lot more into the vaccines themselves, the science behind the mRNA technology. Again, I understand, the mRNA technology was very attractive to numerous people well before this pandemic. And they were hoping that it would be the panacea or the vehicle for any new vaccine. But people really need to understand how that mRNA technology is significantly different than any prior vaccine technology.
Yeah, and you mentioned that everything happened in 108 days. But we are listening all the time that father of vaccine was President Trump, and warp speed was the one that he's bragging about. But we see now that maybe the whole story was not for bragging. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I struggle with that. I openly admit I didn't vote for President Donald Trump, but Operation Warp Speed to me is very troubling. But don't forget, he himself is not a scientist in vaccines, and he relied on a ton of information and a ton of knowledge from people, like Fauci, like Peter Marks, Janet Woodcock, Walensky. He relied on a lot of people to give him information. And I would argue that the information he was giving oftentimes was not true. And even when they thought sometimes the information was true and they found contradictory information, they didn't change their conclusion or they didn't reevaluate their conclusions. So Operation Warp Speed to me, and I agree with you, is very troubling. It's very troubling. And President Trump, if you did see about 6 to 8 weeks ago, did put out a tweet on X, and he did talk about wanting to see from pharma, more data, including safety and efficacy data around the shots. So I was hopeful of that, but I was also then disappointed when he had the CEO of pharma in the White House of late. And, I think I saw Dr. Oz give the CEO of Pfizer a hug, which I just think is very troubling in the conflicts of interest that have continued to occur.
That's right. That was my next question. That was hopeful that maybe they will discuss about it, but after that he decided to give 17 billion to Pfizer, and also I saw there Secretary Kennedy, who was not very happy about it, but he said there same thing like Trump, that he done amazing job. Okay, but I understand this is just politics. Let's continue to talk about science. The best ways to avoid politics is, because my guests usually say that when you mix policy and science, you get policy. That means there's not much science in it. Tell me, you're now you're a member of this organization, React 19. What is this organization about?
So React 19, we formed React 19 in November of 2021, when 10 of us who were injured by the COVID shots all met at a press conference in Washington, D.C. that was held by Senator Ron Johnson, who is an unbelievable, awesome U.S. Senator from the state of Wisconsin. So we all met there and told our stories. And we met with a bunch of scientists who also, explained what was happening to us from a vaccine injury perspective, from a science perspective. And the 10 of us that were injured left there and decided to form an advocacy organization to give hope and support to those, at that point, Americans injured by the COVID shots. So we did. We formed a nonprofit organization here in the United States. We're a science-based, non-political, grassroots advocacy organization to give hope and support to we started as just Americans injured by the COVID shots. We now represent over 40,000 Americans that are injured by the COVID shots. But we are now an international organization. We have 20 international partners all over the world. We are the largest such organization, but we have 20 wonderful partners all across the world. And we are working together to try to give these people hope and support. So what we do here in the United States, our three main pillars of our mission are to give the vaccine-injured people financial, physical, and really emotional assistance. We've given out medical grants. We give grants up to $10,000 US for uncovered medical expenses to people. We do research both within our organization, and we support other organizations in their research, and we support them financially. In the emotional realm, we have well over 40,000 people in social media-based support groups. We also have a national network of social workers and nurses that can be assigned to the more what I call marginalized injured person. And then in this year and next year, we're working very hard at the national level on what I call as the 2 C's, which are care and compensation reform. So while the United States really was at the forefront trying to develop the mRNA vaccines, for those that got injured, they are basically in last place when it comes to taking care of those that are injured. There is really no safety net for us. There's no compensation. There is something called the CICP here, which is a long word. It's called the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program. It's called the Countermeasures Program because we don't consider it a vaccine. It's considered a countermeasure. But our program here has only compensated about 40 people, 40 Americans, for their injuries. And the average payout is about $4,200. So the compensation program here is horrible. So the other C that I talk about is care. These people just can't get medical care. And I'm not even talking about good medical care. I talk about competent medical care. We can't find providers that have any idea of available treatments, the diagnoses, the diagnostics. So we're trying to be part of that solution. So we have a medical team of about 20 providers here in the United States that are working hard, going through the literature, and really working together from all specialties to define our syndromes better and to really find better evidence-based diagnostics, meaning testing and treatments.
According to your experience and your organization, what are the biggest part of these adverse events, exactly these injuries from vaccines?
You mean the biggest type?
Yeah, biggest type, numbers.
Okay, so, well, first of all, what I would tell you is the biggest numbers are really in the neurological category and the autoimmune categories, okay? So I break down the injuries into 3 different pathophysiologies. One is the inflammatory group, one is the allergic group, and one is the autoimmune group. And that includes the neurologic injuries. Now, everyone, of course, as you know, talks about myocarditis, because myocarditis is one that everyone has pretty much agreed to. But in our studies, that only represents about 4 to 5% of the adverse events to the COVID vaccines. The vast, vast majority, about 70 to 80% of the injuries include the neurologic and the autoimmune disorders. And as you probably know, about 70 to 80% of the injuries occur in women. So it's horrible. So what we're trying to focus our attention on right now from the standpoint of our medical group and developing these new protocols is really to focus on the big numbers, which are the neurological injuries and the autoimmune injuries.
I had a guest, Mr. Watersau Kema from Netherlands, and he made some investigation in EMA data about adrenal vigilance, and he found that the biggest adverse events from vaccine was illness itself. That means the biggest part is that you get COVID after COVID shot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the average number of symptoms a person has is over 40 in our studies. So remember, when these people have these injuries, there's not one specific injury. They have a syndrome. And a syndrome, as defined in medicine, is really a constellation of symptoms. And that's what we're seeing. These people aren't just coming in with one disorder. They're coming in with a constellation of disorders and a constellation of symptoms that we define in these syndromes.
And tell me, what is your explanation how these injuries came? What is the reason? I had also lots of guests here, and they tell me there is a few groups. One is reason from this spike protein who is going in all organs in the body. The other one is contamination of plasmid DNA. Third one is because of lipid nanoparticles. Fourth one because of reaction of autoimmune reaction. IgG4 was one of the biggest reactions. What is your explanation according to your experience and data?
Well, I think you pointed out 4 very likely theories. Remember, there probably isn't just one. So first of all, let's start with the spike protein. So the spike protein originally, people thought, oh, you'd get it in your shoulder and it would stay in your deltoid muscle and it would stay locally in the lymphatic and the lymph nodes of your shoulder. Well, that never happened. Okay, as we all know, it went body wide, and unfortunately, it even went into concentrate into organs such as the testes and ovaries, which again, long term is very concerning. So, and the other thing I think is just the choice of the spike protein. So the spike protein is very inflammatory. It creates a huge inflammatory response from the body, and it doesn't just necessarily go away. Again, ideally in a vaccine, you want to be exposed to what we call an antigen, okay, something that you react to. You have a reaction, you create immunity, you create antibodies and T cells, and then it calms down. Well, we now know that in a lot of people that doesn't happen. There was that Yale study that was done last year, and they looked at people with adverse events to the COVID shots, and they found people still had circulating spike protein 2 years after getting vaccinated. Okay, that's not normal. Okay, and why is that? Well, we don't know, and that's why, as we talked about a little bit, is you get a little worried about the contamination, which is one of your other points. So, if you just give a person an mRNA vaccine, that vaccine should kind of burn itself out. All the mRNA is the coding to make a protein. So it should make the protein, and when the mRNA breaks down, there's no more spike protein. But in some people, okay, there's a concern about DNA contamination, and is it possible that DNA that's contaminated in those vials integrates into our own genome, into our own DNA, and that itself is part of the reason that they're continuing to make spike protein. Now, that's not proven, and I don't want to sit here and scare everybody, but it is hypothetical. And there is even a recent case report of a person with bladder cancer, okay, that they took the cancer, they looked at it under a microscope, and they found the mRNA vaccine coding information within the tumor. Well, that's alarming. And again, I don't mean to sit here and scare people, but science, okay, if we find something that's concerning, we have to study it. And for that reason, I'm very concerned about, the study from Yale that showed persistent spike protein in some people 2 years out. I'm very concerned about finding, increased cancer rates. Again, I stay away, honestly, from the terms like turbo cancer and all that, because those are somewhat non-scientific inflammatory terms. But I still think there's concerns. There are safety signals for numerous different adverse events, and there are certainly safety signals of concern for increased cancer risks. And those need to be investigated and not just ignored.
And without doubts, we know that viruses were contaminated with SV40. And this is something that should be discussed about, because we know that SV40 is carcinogenic.
Yeah, for sure. So all of these things are concerning. And the other thing I want to just bring up is the whole concept of molecular mimicry. And that's one of the other, I think, things that's going on here. For whatever reason, it was chosen, the spike protein was chosen as the antigen of choice to develop the mRNA technology for. And I think there's some just degree of a bad luck. I think there's cross-reactivity, or what we call molecular mimicry, between the spike protein and a lot of our own tissues, like our nerve tissue. So I think that there's some similarities between our own nerve tissue, for example, and the spike protein, such that there's cross-reactivity, meaning that our own immune system sees the spike protein as foreign, but it stimulates an immune response that also attacks certain proteins in the surface of our nerve tissue.
Yes, and also we saw some new data showing that was impact also on women's ovary. And we noticed in data in Croatia that just a few months after the vaccines start to roll out in Croatia, we felt unexplainable decrease of birth rate. Is there maybe have some connection with it?
Well, for sure, there's increased risks, decreased birth rates, but also increased miscarriage rates. And that's part of the issue here is we need to get the data out. As you know, initially, Pfizer wanted 75 years to release all this data. And I truly believe that the truth is in the data, but we need to see the data. We need to discuss the data. And really, ever since the pandemic, has started, I mean, that hasn't happened. We have fought tooth and nail. I'm sure everyone across the world has fought tooth and nail to get the data. I mean, here we have to basically submit FOIA after FOIA. So the FOIAs are the Freedom of Information Act releases that we can submit. And it's only with continued legal pressure that we've actually seen the data. And every time we see the data, it's more and more alarming, which raises more and more questions. But the problem here, at least in the United States I can speak for, is the media and our and our scientific communities are completely corrupted by pharmacy money. Again, if you come here to the United States, you go watch TV for an hour, and I guarantee you're going to see 4 to 6 commercials from pharma. It's illegal to do direct consumer pharma marketing anywhere except the United States and I think New Zealand. But pharma money here controls the media, and the media controls the narrative of what we discuss. And frankly, the federal regulatory agencies are supposed to be an independent agency, a watchdog. Like the FDA is supposed to be a watchdog, looking out for the American public and protecting them from drugs and medical devices. But that's not what happened during COVID. They became a partner in planning, distributing. They became a partner with pharma, to distribute their products. And that is wrong. Again, they had a conflict of interest. And again, Peter Marks, I don't know if you who that is. And so Peter Marks was the head of biologics at the FDA. And we've had numerous meetings with him over years, begging him, and we taped them all in. And if any of your listeners are ever interested, we put all of our interactions on a website called therealpetermarks.com. And we begged him to release more safety signals about adverse events that we knew, okay, and we were watching them happen, but he never would. And guess where Peter Marks now works? He works at Eli Lilly. So he now has a position he just took in pharma. And that's unfortunately the current, system where there's a revolving door where, our leaders here in the federal regulatory agencies they leave the federal agencies like the FDA, the CDC, or NIH, and go on to cushy, very high-paid jobs in pharma. And that's their payout.
But now you have a new administration. There is a new chief of FDA, Marty McKay, and also chief of NIH, Jay Bhattacharya, and also Secretary Kennedy. That was hope that something will change. I was listening. He said that all scientific papers are corrupt by the pharmaceutical companies, and they will not anymore publish anything from NIH in these papers. That even chief editors admit they are just a tool for promoting these agencies. How can you fight against this kind of? Let me explain you simply. If you have a game and they have a judge, there is no way that you can win because the judge is theirs.
Yes, I agree with you. It is such a corrupt system where everything is working against truth and transparency. It is an uphill battle. Now, I do want to say that I do have some faith in people like Jay Bhattacharya, Marty McKay, and Bobby Kennedy. I do. And I think they are trying to do their best to right the ship. But when everything is working against you, it is very difficult. And I say everything. I mean the scientific journals, the media, the money, just the old scientific mantra. Remember where most of these journals get their money. It's from pharma. So I want to say that I do have hope and faith in some of the new leadership in these federal agencies here. But I would also tell you, talk is cheap, right? We need action. And again, I know we've had a very good relationship in the past with RFK Jr. And with Children's Health Defense. I do think the people that we just talked about, people like Marty McKay, Jay Bhattacharya, and Bobby Kennedy, want to do the right thing. I understand, though, it's trying to move a mountain, and you're not going to move a mountain in a day. And don't forget, they all have everyone working against them, including our politicians. Okay, and this isn't just for us, the United States, a Republican versus a Democratic issue. some of the biggest challenges politically we have here to try to get, say, compensation reform taken care of are people that are Republicans in the Health, Education, Labor and Pension Committee, people that are Republicans per se, but are very much against people like Bobby Kennedy. Bill Cassidy is an example. As you probably know, Senator Cassidy was one of the biggest opponents trying to keep Bobby Kennedy from getting his position in HHS. So it's people like Bill Cassidy that, while a Republican, is really very much part of what I would call is the old status quo. So this, always want to tell people, this isn't, what we're working for is truth and transparency. And for those people that got injured, we're trying to, in a humanitarian, non-political way, help them. But our politicians, Republican and Democrat, aren't necessarily on our side.
Yes, I was listening a statement from Senator Kennedy, and he said, everybody is receiving money from pharma. That means no way they are biased in any case, and that's why it's not easy to fight against them.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember RFK Jr.'s confirmation hearing, you had people like Senator Bernie Sanders, who was literally attacking Bobby Kennedy, while he is one that takes millions from pharma every year into his coffers. And we were hoping that RFK Jr. would, I was at the confirmation hearing in person, and he finally kind of just started speaking the truth, which is Bobby Kennedy approached Bernie Sanders and basically called him out on it, because they all receive that money. And again, I understand politicians need to pay their bills and need to pay for their ads. But when it comes to things like this pandemic, when it comes to the things like the COVID shots, we have to rise above corruption and money. We have to rise above it and really, first of all, try to do the best and try to help people, reduce morbidity and mortality, from the COVID pandemic. I get it. But for whatever reason, all the people that got the shots, they did what they thought was their part, okay, and then got hosed. There needs to be a safety net. So we have here in the United States, during a public health emergency, something called the PrEP Act. So the PrEP Act, okay, when there's a public health emergency, prevents us from suing anyone. Well, I get that in concept, in a public health emergency, to take our rights away to due process and jury trial, because there was a public health emergency declared. Now, you and I can sit here and debate about whether really there was a public health emergency, but regardless, there was one declared. But my point is, if there's a public health emergency, if you enact the PrEP Act, there has to be a safety net for those people that did what they thought was right, got a shot, and then had an adverse event. And here in the United States, and I would tell you, as you know, most other countries, there's not an adequate safety net. It's better to ignore the people, to call them crazy, to call them anti-vaxxers, and which is, to me, one of the most comical things is to call me an anti-vaxxer when every person in my organization was vaccinated with a COVID shot. Okay? And obviously, I use the word vaccine very lightly when I talk about a COVID shot. But regardless, it's easier to ignore us and, frankly, censor us and call us crazy. Again, if you look at our own studies back, and we did a study of all our membership back in 2021 and 2022, and what was the number one diagnosis that we received? 90% of us had a primary diagnosis of anxiety disorder. Okay? That's it. So we were called crazy, and that's the way to basically censor. It's better now because I think everyone to some degree either knows someone who was vaccine injured or knows somebody that knows somebody. It's certainly better than it was a couple of years ago, but we have a long way to go to getting acknowledgement, okay? Not only acknowledgement of our injuries, but diagnosis and then testing and treatment.
That for sure doesn't help in trust in institutions. If some new pandemic, for example, happens, or any kind of emergency situation of international concerns, trust in institutions is very low. And what will happen in the future? Nobody will do as, maybe I'm wrong, what is about United States. I know in Croatia that people are not trusting institutions because of these lies during pandemic.
Yeah, so I think you bring up a great point. And I want to basically expand on your point a little bit. So one of the things people like Peter Marks was saying before he left was how the misinformation and disinformation was creating vaccine hesitancy. Now, I would say that he's completely wrong. I think it's the lack of truth and transparency and the lack of commitment to true science that has led to vaccine hesitancy. But I would argue in today's world, we're beyond healthcare, we're beyond vaccine hesitancy. We've moved on to something I call as healthcare hesitancy. When we relied on our federal health agencies so much, our healthcare organizations and our doctors to do the right thing for us during the pandemic, and they didn't often do the right thing. Why? Because the shots weren't safe and they weren't effective. Okay? We not only are vaccine hesitant at this point, the world is becoming healthcare hesitant, meaning we don't trust anybody when it comes to our healthcare. And is that right? It's unfortunate, but I can clearly see why it's occurring. So I think there's something much bigger going on than vaccine hesitancy. I call it healthcare hesitancy, and we just don't trust anyone. And that's sad. Remember the days of when the doctor was kind of the one that you could rely on to be honest with you. And who believes in that anymore? I don't. And I'm a physician, and I openly tell people I'm embarrassed. I am embarrassed to be a physician in today's world. Why? Because they're no longer scientists. They just do what they're told. They want to make as much money as they can. They don't follow science. They let corporate pencil pushers tell them how to take care of patients. And they don't have the guts to stand up, learn about science themselves, and stand up for their patients and be their patient advocate. They're not.
I have a question not only for the United States, for everybody, and for Croatia also. How is possible that so many doctors and scientists during pandemic knew what was happening and they were quiet? They were not standing out. They were not saying what's wrong. They were just quiet. And when you ask them personally, they said they want to keep their job.
That's sad. And again, in days past, again, I do think physicians deserve more respect because they were willing to do the right thing. But clearly they're not. And I also I want to tell you a little bit about, in my opinion, how healthcare has changed over the last couple of decades. When I first started practice, right about 2000, okay, the vast majority of orthopedic surgeons were independent, meaning they work for themselves. Okay, about 70% of physicians were independent. They worked for themselves. About 30% of physicians were employed, meaning they were working for a company. Now, move forward 20 some years, and those numbers have almost flipped. Okay, so the vast majority of physicians now are employed. They're employed by large corporations, and they basically do what they're told because they don't want to lose their jobs. They're no longer scientists. They are basically punch-a-clock employees. And I think that's a big part of the problem, and I really do. It's become healthcare today, and I can't speak for the Croatian system, but I think worldwide it's become a revenue-based corporate healthcare system.
That means corporate took over our healthcare and public health. But things also now changing a little. There is a Florida good example, and Dr. Josef Ladapo said that nobody will anymore will decide for your health. There will anymore will be vaccines, mandate vaccines in Florida. That means things have changed in the United States. Maybe this way will come in other states.
Yeah, this is a grassroots movement. Remember, we don't have the support of our politicians necessarily, and the media and our healthcare organizations, but we do have voices, and if we all speak up, we can make a difference. And Dr. Ladapo, we were referring to, I just spoke to him the other day, and we have a meeting next week. He's an amazing, courageous person. We just need more people that are willing to step up and to say the truth. And, we just need more people like yourself sharing the message, sharing the truth, and motivating people. I give a fair amount of talks, and that people always ask, well, what should I do? My answer is just do something. Okay. And if everybody just did something like, try to have a conversation with someone or held a watch party for one of these documentaries we're talking about, if they did something just like that, we would basically slowly continue to move the needle. We are moving the needle. We are getting the truth out, without the help of media and scientific journals, but we need to speed it up, and we need more courageous leaders like Dr. Ladapo.
Just a few days ago, I was present in establishing new organization in Europe, Make Europe Healthy Again. And there were guests, Dr. Asim Malhotra and Robert Malone. and they spoke about this, what we're talking about this today, and they were all around Europe, physicians, and not only physicians, there was also lawyers. Organization is much wider than just medicine. And they are talking about same things in Europe, that we try to change something, because my experience is that I became journalist just because I saw how much journalism is corrupt and how they are lying and making promotions, not really sharing information. Robert Malone said that it's very important for vaccines to be safe and effective because we're giving to the healthy people. Regular medicines we're giving to the sick people, and it's understandable, but this we are giving to healthy people. What is your stand about this?
Well, yeah, again, one of the principles in medicine, as you know, is first do no harm, okay?
Primo non
That's one of the principles. Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the things we've ignored in this whole situation. And all of what I would say is our historical norms in healthcare have been ignored. And one of them, obviously, is first do no harm. But the other one that I really want to highlight a little bit is never test an experimental product in children, pregnant and lactating women. That is clearly one of the, hundreds of years in medicine, we've followed that dictum, and we've ignored that. And that's why I'm very happy, at least here in the United States. So you were referring to Dr. Malone a little bit, and I also want to give credit to Dr. Retzet-Levy. And they're both part of the ACIP committee here, which is the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. So one of the things that RFK Jr. did is fire the entire prior ACIP committee membership and put in new people like Robert Malone, like Dr. Retzet-Levy, who are amazing. And they are, I hope, going to continue to get back to true science, okay? To first of all, be very careful with all these immunizations and relook at them all. What does it hurt? And again, I don't want to get too much into autism and that concern, but what does it hurt if there's a concern or question about a vaccine and something like autism? What does it hurt to protect our children just to take another look? What does it hurt to do another couple of studies? It doesn't. This is too important. Like you said, we are giving medicines, and again, an intervention like a vaccine. We are giving these shots to people that are healthy. We don't want to hurt them. It's okay to re-examine science. Science is rarely ever black and white. Science is what I call dynamic, meaning it changes over time. You find evidence that can change it or modify a conclusion. And that's okay. And that's where I hope like the new ACIP committee really takes it and starts re-examining everything that we necessarily, we might have thought it was fine. Okay, but is it hurt to ask? Let's go back years ago here in the United States, there was a medicine called thalidomide that was used in pregnant women, okay, to help them get, or used in women to help them get pregnant. Well, unfortunately, what we didn't know is that generations down the road, children were born without arms, okay? And it only took years of re-examining things to realize that thalidomide was a horrible drug. But again, we have to be open to science and open to what science shows us. I think early on in the pandemic, there were a lot of people like Fauci and Peter Marks that really wanted to be what I call as godlike, wanted to be the savior. And they were so predetermined with the conclusion that the vaccines were the end of the pandemic. They were so predetermined that they were safe and effective that anytime any information came in front of them, they were blinded from seeing truth. And they'd rather double down and say that anybody that questions them is anti-science and is crazy, rather than just admit their own humility.
Yeah, I understand. Just for people who are vaccine injured in Croatia, because we don't have any organization, as I know, who helping this kind of people. Is anybody can help us from Croatia if they are vaccine injured? Can they connect you somewhere?
Absolutely. So again, we are, a U.S.-based organization, but again, my draw and my desire is a humanitarian call. And I talk to vaccine injured people around the world. And as I've also described, we have 20 international partners. I don't think there's a formal organization in Croatia, but any of your listeners or viewers, certainly take a look at our website, which is www.react.org. We get submissions from people all around the world, and we will help. We will do whatever we can to help anyone from any country. That doesn't matter. Sometimes we find a closer international partner, but I promise to you and to your listeners and viewers that if they need help from a COVID vaccine or a COVID shot injury, if you get a hold of our organization, we will find help for them.
Officially, you are not practicing medicine anymore, but you say doctor, and you are still have oath to Hippocrates that you help people.
Absolutely. I'm still licensed in the state of Wisconsin and the state of Texas, but I'm not practicing as an orthopedist, but this is my mission. I didn't plan on this. I thought I'd probably work for another 10 or 20 years. I love my job, but I am 110% dedicated to this population, and I will not quit. We will not quit at React 19 until we are successful. And again, for us, success is finding these people medical care, but also finding them fair and just compensation.
It seems to that God give you this path to do this.
Well, I agree with you. So yeah, no, I really agree. I'm following the path that I was put on. I can't fight it. I didn't plan it, but I won't shy away from it. But I do view this very much as a spiritual battle.
Thank you, Dr. Wallskog. Thank you for your work. I highly recommend you and your organization, React 19, and I will put all links for everybody who wants to connect you and continue with your work. Thank you for your acceptance of this interview.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
Evo, dragi narode, ta tema kod nas je već možda prošlost. Prošlost je zato što smo i mi ostavili da ostanemo u prošlosti i nismo ništa raščistili. Znamo da je bilo nekoliko inicijativa, 2 točnije, u Saboru da se otvori istražno povjerenstvo pa da postavljamo pitanja vezano za pandemiju. Među kojima bi se pojavilo i vezano za ovaj proizvod za kojeg su nam tvrdili da je sigurno i efikasno, za koje su nam rekli cijepi se, misli na druge, iako su znali tog trenutka da ne šteti od širenja, ne štiti od oboljevanja, dakle svjesno su nas lagali i dan danas, 2025. preporučaju to cjepivo, pa čak i trudnicama. Ignoriraju potpuno sve ove stvari koje mi govorimo u emisijama, dakle tu je stvarno golema dokumentacija koja dokazuje sve ovo o čemu govorimo, čak unatoč cenzuri, unatoč korupciji u medicinskim institucijama i dalje možete doći do tih informacija, međutim svi ignoriraju i dalje preporučuju da se cijepite protiv covida koja ne samo da onda nije bila jako smrtonosna bolest, danas još manje, a i dalje nije ni efikasna, nije ni sigurna i niko ne želi razgovarati o posljedicama. Što se događa da su do te mjere nastavili kontinuirano propagandu, a ne žele razgovarati o činjenicama koje su neizbježne. Dakle, svi vidimo da je slon u sobi, ali ga ignoriraju. Međutim, evo, ja sam odlučio i dalje te teme otvarati s razlogom što ako ne raščistimo sa prošlošću, nema prostora za suradnju u budućnosti. Mene najviše zabrinjava povjerenje prema institucijama koje možemo primijetiti svakodnevno da ga nema. A izvanredne situacije i druge vrste se mogu dogoditi. Kako možemo zajedno rješavati problem ako u one ključne institucije koje plaćamo na kraju krajeva porezni obveznici i političare koje izabiremo na izborima ne možemo imati povjerenja, a nećemo ga imati sve dok se ne raščiste problemi i pitanja iz pandemije. Sad svjedočimo svi da je i velika korupcijska afera ministra koji je u to vrijeme bio ministar zdravstva Bilija Beroša se događala u vrijeme upravo pandemije. Dakle, korupcijski događaji za koje su neki priznali, dakle sudionici su priznali dijelom da su sudjelovali u tome i kažnjeni su, suđenje se nastavlja za ministra i određeni broj doktora, a to što su dogovarali su upravo u vrijeme pandemije. Upravo kada smo mi kao zemlja se zaduživali, Next Generation EU je fond u kojem smo se zadužili, to su nazvali fond za oporavak i otpornost, a to je kredit do 2058. godine koje počnemo vraćati 2028. Dakle, svi smo uzeli kredit da bi se oporavili od te pandemije, odnosno od političkih odluka donesenih u pandemiji, a netko je dogovarao proviziju za kupovinu strojeva od tog novca. I danas kad postavljamo pitanje da želimo sve istražiti, jer znamo da su i nabave išle do 5 milijuna kuna bez javnog natječaja, a potrošeno je, koliko ja znam zadnji podatak, nisam odavno dalje dublje išao, preko 4 milijarde kuna, što znači da puno, 4 milijarde kuna bar ima sumnji da li je još bilo korupcije. Međutim, složno su i vladajući HDZ, nažalost i DP koji je izdao svoje birače i otišao sa HDZ-om, i Možemo i SDP kao navodna oporba su rekli ne, mi ne želimo ništa istraživati. Pa ja postavljam pitanje, što skrivate? Međutim, nastavit ćemo pitati, a ja ću nastaviti dovoditi goste, ako ne mogu iz Hrvatske, mogu iz cijelog svijeta. Na kraju promjene, odnosno sve je došlo iz Sjedinjenih država, došao je problem iz Sjedinjenih država, to znamo, to je virus koji je nastao u laboratoriju gdje je počelo gain of function upravo u Sjedinjenim državama, nastavilo se u Wuhanu, bar po sadašnjim informacijama, pa možda će i raskrinkavanje cijele situacije doći iz Sjedinjenih država, pa jednom i do Hrvatske, pa ćemo i mi i naša generacija imati prilike čuti tko je bio tko u pandemiji. Hvala lijepo na pažnji i uskoro se vidimo u sljedećoj epizodi Slobodni.
Nitko vas neće natjerati da se poklonite zvijeri, učinit ćete to svojevoljno, odbacujući vjeru. Bićete laka meta za zvijer, jer se niste podredili vjeri. Ako se ne podredite vjeri, podredit ćete se zvijeri. Toliko ćete se suobličiti sa ovim svijetom, da nećete ni prepoznati da ste u zabludi. Biće to najveća demonska prevara ikada i pravedno zaslužena osuda nad nepokajanim grešnicima.
Gdje su svi oni koji su nas